Hey everybody, it's Kevin. It's been a while since I've recorded a video, so I thought I'd check in and tell everybody what's been going on. I have been back in the States for about 3 weeks now, but the last 3 days in particular have been interesting in that I've become a target of an online harassment campaign in China. So I'll tell you about that. 这个视频我会用英文讲，因为话题有点复杂，然后我感觉中文的表达能力可能达不到这个话题的要求呢，所以中文的听众们可以继续听，我会放字幕呢，所以应该没问题。So to understand what's been happening, I have to go back to January, just after the lockdown of Wuhan happened in China. So on January 25th, we were in the middle of lockdown, and I was looking for things to do, as those of you who are in the States right now can probably relate to. And so I started making some videos for essentially a Chinese version of YouTube. It's called Bilibili. And I had posted over the course of about 6 weeks, maybe 15 to 20 videos, and had some decent success. I had almost 7,000 followers on that site after the 6 weeks of posting videos. So you have to understand social media in China, especially as a foreigner. You can't really say anything negative about China. Typically, it all has to be positive. And you're kind of encouraged to say things about your home country that are not as good as China. There's actually a saying for this. It's called 财富密码, which translates roughly to the key to riches, you can think of it as. The most extreme examples of this, there are people who will run around in their videos just doing everyday stuff in China, really excitedly saying that they love China, they love China, they love China every step of the way. And then there's also people who will be very harsh about the United States, for example. Those kind of videos, they do well in China because they help with a narrative that the government is trying to promote. Look, this foreigner came to China from another country, and he or she thinks it's better than America. And because the users in China don't necessarily have open access to platforms like YouTube, a lot of what they understand about the outside world can be through these type of platforms, through Chinese video sharing platforms like Bilibili. The government wants to help construct a narrative that China's the greatest place to live, because why wouldn't you? The problem for me is that has never really been my style. I've lived in a couple of different places and been to 40 countries in my life so far. And there are many places that I really do enjoy, but I don't love any place so much that I'm going to run around screaming how much I love it. It's just not my style. It's not really something that I can do. And so in my videos in China, I was generally positive, generally not very critical of the United States, but not kind of over the top slapstick talking about how much I love the place. Again, just not my style. The videos that I had posted on that website kind of all fell into that category of being relatively positive. Starting in February of this year, I began tweeting quite a bit in Chinese, and most of my content there was satirical jokes about some of the things that I find kind of funny about living in China. Generally not so much about the government directly, because that's not something that I felt safe doing while I was in the country. Maybe making fun of some of the more patriotic people in China who, if you say one negative thing about Chinese life in any way, that they'll basically be trying to find you and harass you and stuff online, which is incidentally what's happening right now. But since coming home a couple of weeks ago, if you've been following me, you've noticed that my tweets have become more openly critical, and part of the reason for that is that I don't really fear getting in trouble over what I'm saying now. And so it stems from the fact that I had this video channel in China where I was generally talking about things in a neutral to relatively positive sense, and then these tweets that I've been posting out, especially recently, have been more critical. So I've been accused of what's called 两面派, which means being two-faced. On Chinese internet platforms, that I'll say good things about China, and then on Western internet platforms, I'll say negative things about China. And to an extent, that's kind of true, although I would say it's not by choice. Again, that goes back to, if you're going to be remotely successful on a Chinese platform, you absolutely can't achieve it by saying things that are negative about the government. After 3.5 years of living there, especially through the coronavirus outbreak and seeing how that was handled at the beginning, I had a lot to say. So when I started making videos, it was a kind of unique time in China for me. The first time I'd gone there was in, let's say, the middle of 2016, and when I moved there to start studying Chinese was the beginning of 2017. So by the time the coronavirus outbreak happened, I had been living there for about 3 years, and in my 3 years there, I had never once seen people on social media outside of a very specific circle of known dissidents to say anything contrarian to the government. After the coronavirus outbreak began getting more serious and people realized what a problem it was going to be and realized that there was a cover-up, there was a lot of open criticism of the Chinese government, which is something in my 3 years that I had absolutely never seen before. I think in early February there was a picture that went around social media that became kind of famous of a girl in Shanghai holding up a sign saying, "I want freedom of speech." And again, I had absolutely never seen anything like that. When I started seeing these things, I had a sort of feeling that maybe things were going to move to being a little bit more open in China. I had heard that up until around 2008, Chinese society was a lot more open, the internet was a lot more open, what you were allowed to say without getting censored was a lot broader, and then starting in 2012, things started to get more tight. So I was holding hope that things would possibly begin to get more open, which would be extremely, extremely welcome from my perspective, which is absolutely not to say that I was looking for people to rise up, etc., 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 and do something extreme. No, I was just hoping that things would become a little bit more open there. And that hope lasted until about the middle of February, when it became clear that the government was very interested in controlling the coronavirus narrative in terms of how the outbreak happened, how it didn't happen, who's responsible, who wasn't. That propaganda campaign got more and more aggressive as we got into March, in the middle of March. I wrote an essay about it if you're curious, to explain the things that happened along the course of that propaganda campaign. On March 1st, the Chinese government enacted a new internet security law under which it became a lot more difficult to say things on social media, especially as they relate to the coronavirus outbreak. Around that time, I think it was on March 1st, I wanted to release a video that I had made about China's and America's handling of the coronavirus up till that time. The video was, on a scale of -10 being very critical and 10 being very positive. With respect to China, it was in the low positive numbers, and in the US it was in the low negative numbers. I wanted to cite things like Donald Trump at the time saying that it's like the flu and it's just going to go away and people don't need to wear masks and all that kind of thing. So there was plenty to talk about. In any case, for Bilibili, this platform, any video that you post has to go through an auditing process. Prior to that internet security law going into place, the auditing process took anywhere from 30 minutes at a not busy time to maybe 2 hours at a very busy time when a lot of people are uploading videos. So that's somebody watching every single video and making sure that it doesn't have restricted content or forbidden content prior to it going online. However, after that law went into effect, I found that the auditing time for that particular video was about 48 hours, and I hadn't gotten an answer. After about 48 hours, I contacted the company and asked them if they could help me push that video along. And I got an answer very quickly saying that the video failed to pass audit. The reason I was given was that it was too negative. So I called them up and asked them to give me specifics, and they just said, yeah, the overall tone of the video was too negative and it used some content from foreign media sources and therefore it couldn't be published. So I spent the next couple of days redoing the video, which meant taking the foreign media sources that I had cited in the video and replacing them with sources that were accessible within China, and making the tone a little bit more friendly overall. It was a 48-hour wait with no answer. I contacted them by email again and asked them to help push it along. And then I very quickly got the same answer, that this content couldn't be approved. At that point, I had probably spent 5 or 6 days making and remaking this video, doing the subtitles in both Chinese and English, which takes a lot of time. If you've cut video before, you'll know. And all for nothing. So I called them up again and asked, what's the deal? You said if I changed the media sources and made it slightly friendlier tone, that it should be able to get published. And after about a 15-minute call of them hemming and hawing a lot, the answer I eventually got was, only approved sources can talk about the coronavirus now, which is to say that if the content didn't exactly fit the narrative that the government was trying to spin at the time, that you just couldn't publish a video on it. So that really ticked me off, especially because I had found another video at that time, pure propaganda, about a 2.5-minute clip saying that Italian researchers had discovered that the virus came from America. And I just said, okay, so if you're not letting people publish videos about it, why are you letting this person publish that one? And they said, okay, well, we're sorry, we'll delete that. The impression that I walked away with this from was that I was simply not going to be able to say what I wanted to say on the Chinese internet. And if I was going to become a successful vlogger on this Bilibili platform and eventually find a way to monetize it, I would always be worrying about what I was going to say. there are so many cases of an influencer in China accidentally liking a tweet from the president of Taiwan or accidentally retweeting something that is supportive of the protesters in Hong Kong, only to watch their contract that they have with a marketing company be torn up. And I've heard recently that some influencers are being forced to sign contracts that contain clauses which will hold them liable for brand damage if, even on the open internet, let's say Twitter or Facebook or something, they post something or like something that would ordinarily be censored within the Chinese internet. And for me, that's something I couldn't live with. I wasn't interested in making videos only to fit a certain propaganda narrative. And it was at that time that I decided that I was not interested in making money on the Chinese internet. In fact, I wasn't really interested in doing anything to make money in China anymore, because I was getting more and more of this feeling as these propaganda initiatives were ramping up and internet security was getting tighter and tighter, that instead of the more open direction that we were headed to in late January, early February, we were getting to a place that was going to be more and more closed. And then about another week and a half passed, and it was announced that journalists from several Western media outlets, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post perhaps, were getting kicked out of the country because their coverage had run afoul of the government. And after that, I decided that I didn't want to live in China anymore. I did not want to be the next Michael Spavor, the next Michael Kovrig, who at that point had been in jail for over a year for crimes that they almost certainly did not commit. I just thought for my safety that it was time to leave. And so up towards the end of March, I ended up buying 2 plane tickets back to Los Angeles, both of which were canceled. And I could not find another flight home until the middle of June. So I ended up coming home around June 21st, back to the US. After getting home, I started to say the things that I had wanted to say for a long time. I had written some essays, for example, back in March and April that I held off on publishing while I was in the country because I felt they were too critical of the government and didn't feel comfortable publishing them while there. So I've published some of those since being home. My tweets, satirical jokes, have also been more openly critical of the Chinese government. And so that's where the online harassment campaign that I referenced started from. People thought that I was making money from the Chinese market by making videos that, let's say, are praising China. If we're being real, the videos were probably on balance positive, and that's honestly how I feel. I mean, there's many things about living in China that I love. I wouldn't have spent 3.5 years of my life there if I didn't feel that way. But there's also a lot of things worth criticizing, and towards the end of my time there, I felt that the things worth criticizing began to outweigh the things worth praising. So some people began screenshotting my tweets and posting them on Weibo, which is a Chinese site very similar to Twitter, to say, hey, look, there's this guy who was making these videos in China, and now all of a sudden he's critical of the Chinese government and critical of China, so he's two-faced, he's mianpai. I think there was a person who had about 1 million followers who shared this post, and after that, sort of all hell broke loose. I don't know how many messages I've gotten in the past 3 days saying, things about my mother, which aren't very kind. I'll let you imagine what they are, or that they want to beat the shit out of me, or if they see me again, they're going to fuck me up, and blah, 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 blah. The really funny thing about the last week is that about a week ago, I tweeted something that some very anti-China people on Twitter construed as me praising the security state of the Chinese Communist Party, which, on balance, I'd be one of the last people to do such a thing. After all, I decided that it was time for me to come home because I wanted to be in a place where I was free and not under security camera surveillance 24 hours a day, because that's what it's like to live in a Chinese city, is that there's cameras everywhere. And so, on the one hand, I have people saying that I am somehow an agent for the communist government to come and praise them on the Western internet, and then I have people who are saying that I'm a China hater and don't ever let me see you in China again. So anyway, that's an update of what's been going on recently. Unfortunately, I don't ever see myself going back to China. As much as I do enjoy living there, I'll probably talk about some of those things other than how convenient it is to get delivery very quickly and how convenient it is to have high-speed rail, because there's a lot beyond that. But then again, there's also a lot to be critical of. Thank you all for tuning in. I am on vacation in the mountains and driving west tomorrow. I hope everybody is safe and doing well. Talk to you soon.